Welcome to the Werewolf Den, where we do a deep dive into the core concepts and principles behind White Wolf's Werewolf the Apocalypse.
I'm Amylin.
And I am Ryan. Welcome back. For this episode, we were going to basically be continuing our exploration of the Umbra, but in a more focused sense by looking at the various Near Realms. Now, the thing that I think is important about the Near Realms is that there's something that players can come into a game and have an understanding about. You can have this very unique setting where you've thought of dozens of different sites of spiritual significance throughout the realm you're talking about, whether it's a city or what have you, but as a player, you'll have to discover those in-game. And that's great, but you can't just bombard a player with 20 different sites because in the midst of that vomit of information, they're going to glaze out or forget these things. And so I think the Near Realms are useful in that players can just assume that they can find sites of these sorts within your setting. And of course, using that to adapt and be like, all right, yeah, we're going to have the Atrocity Realm, but where is that within my setting is a great way for you to have an easy time of creating these unique sites as well without having to homebrew an entirety right off the cuff like that.
I like to call this encouragement of proactive exploration versus encouragement of proactive curation. With homebrewing an entire setting in much in the same way that we've talked about with the previous episodes, where you can take a giant city, find places that are significant to you, and then homebrew that into something incredibly unique and significant while still maintaining the essence of that location. That's what I like to call encouraging proactive exploration, because it more or less encourages your players to kind of think like you as the storyteller are thinking. It encourages them to go out and do their own research, find these sites, and kind of be like, okay, well, this place sounds really cool. Let's see if the storyteller came up with anything about, per se, St. Mungo's Museum, which is this really cool museum of history of religion within the city of Glasgow. The players have to go out of their way to learn that that place exists. Whereas encouraging proactive curation, your players, most of them have read the books. And so they know then about the Battlegrounds, the Atrocity Realm, the Summerlands, all of those places. And so when they want to try to go somewhere, these are going to be the places that they gravitate to. And that's going to be proactive curation then, because that's them saying, okay, storyteller, I want to find this place that I can do this thing.
Mm-hmm. And because there's some measure of understanding about those sites, the book has, a paragraph for each of these different Near Realms. It's something where the players can go, all right, these are some concrete ideas that I understand something about and can think of to work with them. So we'll jump right into it because the first one gives us an excellent example of what we're just talking about here. The first realm is the Abyss, which is the place where lost things go. Things that are truly lost end up in the Abyss. And the books do a very good job of leaving a lot of these kind of nebulous. They talk about examples of great umbral explorers that have these theories and hypotheses about these different sites. But the books themselves don't go like, yep, this is what's going on, da da da. So, for example, the book mentions that within the Abyss, all lost things end up here. So my immediate idea was that the worm's sanity, that section of the worm that was broken off when the Weaver contained it, somehow ended up here. And within my LARP, these were a phenomenal resource because, again, I've got dozens of players, right? I can't just vomit out ideas of all this homebrewed stuff I've come up with. They need to have an innate understanding of the setting and something to work with there. So I had introduced the Book of the Worm, which is this great MacGuffin item where all of the great Black Spiral Dancer scholars and spiritualists throughout the ages have sort of written their crazy mad ramblings, and it's kind of a Lovecraftian type text where somewhere in there's some mad secret of incredible power hidden, but no one knows what it is. So I just threw this out because it's a LARP and you can do that. See what the players do with it. And at first they started off trying to protect it and secure it because Black Spiral Dancers will occasionally go on spiritual quests to find this and whatnot. So, they're passing it around from person to person and, they're staying up late at night, with their weapons clenched near them, waiting for an ambush and, ambushes are coming and it's a clear sign that, yes, you've beaten every attack so far, but eventually this could fall back into the worm's hands and we don't want that. So some players just went to a narrator. I didn't even run this scene, but they had decided all right, we know the Abyss anchorhead is in this person's territory, so we're going to go there and we're just going to chuck this book in because it'll be lost and no one will be able to find it ever. And I was like, this is an awesome idea, but what if the worm's air quote sanity somehow found this book and within it was a secret to like break free of the abyss and break free of the Weaver's containment? And so within the LARP, I just turned this into the great end meta plot where the worm's sanity, again air quotes, had gotten free and the players had to stop it. And you know, when I came up with this LARP, I was just like, I'm just gonna work with what people give me. And having these anchorheads gave the players greater ability to throw stuff my way. Stuff that I could react off of without having to sort of think of where the grand narrative is going to end up. It made the story just 1,000 times better because it was something directly related to player actions. It gave them greater autonomy and ability to sort of influence the course of events on a grand scale. Perfect. And that's exactly why I think these sites are so important within the setting.
And this is one of those things where when you come in, even if you build your big old homebrew, it's always a good idea to just, if you find sites within your city that's like, man, this feels like this could be something for the Abyss. If you have a city that has like a spectacularly devastating homeless problem or something like that, or places within it where people just conjugate and just go to just do drugs and lose themselves, or these places of ultimate despair, this is a good spot to consider, maybe I should drop an Abyss anchorhead here. Mm-hmm. And this can still then be that way where you're still incorporating that homebrew, but then now you're thinking of, well, what do my players already know? And what are they already familiar with? And then giving them that familiarity.
The Abyss also, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, but the thought of things that are lost can technically be reclaimed here. And again, this doesn't have to be, you know, your car keys that you lost 13 years ago and have been unable to find even after moving. Like,
I found them in the Abyss. What are you talking about?
Right.
That's where my keys always go.
It wasn't under the couch cushions. But it can be abstract stuff as well. If an NPC has abandoned all hope and is considering Rite of the Winterwolf or even, you know, an inglorious kind of suicide kind of thing, you can do a side plot in the Abyss to try and find that hope that that person has lost. You can really extend this into all sorts of different ways. And it's another cool way where, you know, within a lot of stories, when something is truly lost, it's lost, right? But the players can use the Abyss to bring these things back into the fold. And so it opens up a lot of very interesting story options. And I think it's probably one of the better of the different Near Realms because of that, because it opens up so many opportunities for both players and stories. Next up, we have the Aetherial Realm, which is the sort of celestial sphere. It is the place where all lunar bridges go through. So if you're doing great traverses throughout a distance, using moon bridges and things of that sort, the celestial sphere sort of falls into that. I don't think there's as much to work with in this regard. It is the place where Luna and Helios reside. And all of the different planets sort of have their manifestations there as well. And I think if you wanted to get a little bit more human culturally, you can do some cool stuff with that. You know, just taking associations, you know, Mars, Planet of War, how does that impact the celestial realm? So I think it's got a decent amount of diversity, but just the general idea of that place, nothing immediately comes to my mind in regards to it.
What immediately comes to my mind? Incorporating notions of the heavens into your game. I like doing things like this. This is also then when you get to dig really deep into that mythology aspect once again with it, because there's so many different cool mythos that you can draw into, where a universal experience with every culture is looking up into the stars and wondering what's beyond. So you can very easily take this notion of what is heaven in various different cultures, and then start merging it, and then even turning it into a giant junction point. But I very frequently like to, whenever I get the rare opportunity to have players come into the Celestial Realm, treating first entrance into it almost like a way station, where you can kind of come in and you have this infinite and ever-expanding way station that then leads to the possibilities of just all of these other heavens, all of these other worlds. And if you want to introduce a culture that isn't necessarily intrinsic to your setting, but is still something that could potentially have an impact on your game, the Celestial Realm is actually a really good way to do that, because it has that infinite possibilities of going out and finding, oh, well, this is where unicorn resides. Like, the true concept of unicorn. This is the realm where Grandfather Thunder rings and bangs his drums in order to call down his lightning. However you want to interpret that. The big thing is always, with the Celestial Realm, always make sure that when your players are dealing with it, I always want to make sure to emphasize that they should feel small coming into it. They should feel like a person would going into space, where you have this just infinity. We talk about how the Umbra has a lot of infinity, and the Celestial Realm, I feel like, is a good way to emphasize that point. This is where all of it comes from. Luna is here. Helios is here. From here, those two look down upon Gaia, who you think is everything, but actually isn't. That's how I like to run with the Celestial Realm anyway.
Yeah, those are good points. I think that sort of opens up my mind as well. When you were talking about the heavens, I was thinking of sort of a Confucian, like, Chinese mandate of heaven. Like, you can go to the ethereal realm to behold the will of the heavens and try and, like, prophesize the future a bit. Or even, like, looking back at the past. So all of these constellations usually refer to, like, great stories and things of that sort. And so, yeah, I like the idea of it as, like, a waypoint to anything. I think that's a cool way to think of it. Next up, we have the Arcadia Gateway, which I'm kind of about, just because old World of Darkness, Changeling the Dreaming is an interesting system. And there's a lot of cool stuff to it, but it still has elements that I don't fancy, and the Arcadia Gateway really plays with those ideas. I think most people have definitely taken to the new World of Darkness, Changeling the Lost, and the setting that it incorporates. And I don't think there's anything really stopping you from using whichever one you fancy, whether Changeling the Dreaming or Changeling the Lost, when you're looking at this setting. But I think it does definitely impact the realm itself, because you are going to the fairy realms. And if your changelings are sort of the old world sort, which are bedraggled by banality and just trying to survive, that impacts the relationship that they have with the Garu. Whereas if they are the keepers from Changeling the Lost, if they are these alien entities that are kind of Lovecraftian and can't be associated with as a mortal would, then that definitely impacts what you can do in this place. And so I think making that clear within your setting is very important when thinking about the Arcadia Gateway. Because if you have players expecting it's going to be sort of a Changeling the Dreaming type thing, where I'm a Fianna and these are my kin, that can completely get turned around if suddenly they're dealing with these alien creatures that are kidnapping people and doing what they do.
You can also just do what I do and split the difference. Because a lot of Fae folklore comes from this notion of explaining natural phenomenon that occurred. The Wild Hunt was very frequently, people would come to interpret tellers as just people being scared of the wind and geese because they're very loud and very scary, and you just want to huddle yourself inside and hide from it. But the Fae also incorporate not just like the Sluagh that I basically just described, but the Bansheed, where you have these fairer-than-thou beings who see themselves as elevated and above you, but still think very mercurially and different from you. But this is also something where you can then take your Fianna players and also still focus in on some of those smaller scale explaining scientific phenomenon sort of ways. And where maybe in the real world, yes, we've come up with an explanation as to why the tides work. But within Arcadia, those ideas still exist. And that's where I like to play with the Arcadian Gate, is taking those old ideas and making them true again. And I think that's where you can really have fun with it.
Good points. Next up, we have the Atrocity Realm, which I think you really have to sort of think abstractly about to make it work. Because if this is the place where all of the, like, horrible machinations of the worm go to reside and repeat in perpetuity, then why does this setting exist when, you know, your material realm is also, like, this is what the players are largely engaging with? It feels like there has to be a higher purpose for this plane in order to make it worth the endeavor. Because why are you going into the Near Umbra to interact with this atrocity when it's happening in real time in the material realm. But I think there are still some options to work with that. One of the things the book suggests is that the only way to escape this realm is to empathize with those who are suffering through that plight. And I think that can be a great tool to use as a storyteller, where your players will have to demonstrate that perhaps you cannot stop this from happening, but you have to understand what the victims are going through. And that can be a very cool aspect to embrace within the story. That, yeah, you can't just go and kill the perpetrator of these problems and assume that it's done. You really have to engage with the subject matter and demonstrate that your character is learning something from this experience. And I think that's a cool tool to use. That it's not just the usual werewolf tricks of like burning a bunch of rage and disemboweling someone that's going to solve the problem. You really have to sort of put yourself in their shoes.
I kind of feel like the Atrocity Realm is the perfect realm for pilgrimage for our interpretation of the Silent Striders. Because forever stuck in this loop of atrocity is very much the experience of the Wraith. And Wraiths are very much a thing that Silent Striders have to deal with on a very regular basis. Mm-hmm. So I like introducing notions where the Atrocity Realm is a pilgrimage site for the Silent Striders to learn empathy for the dead.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Following that, we have the Battleground. And this is another one that I think has a lot of opportunities, but they're not quite as obvious as, say the Abyss, where you have mankind's glorification of war, and indeed the Garrou's glorification of war. They are a warrior society where these ideas have manifested into this near realm. And so there has to be a sense of introspection, realizing that the Garrou glory in their combat, but is it necessarily the best tool to use? Look what it's done. It's really created this near realm that is a manifestation of the worm. No doubt. And so kind of being aware of that duality within the site is important. But the book's just sort of listed as a place, Garrou go there to burn off rage. Meh. There are plenty of targets for your rage. I think it's useful as a place to, again, kind of like we talked about with the Atrocity Realm, where you can understand the experiences of the combatants, come to terms with why they thought their war was just, and again, on both sides, right? You can practice that level of empathy. But you can also use it to sort of learn the tricks of the trade. If you're going up against some high-powered, high-ranking Black Spiral dancer, there's a good chance that you can go into the Battleground realm and find a fight that they participated in, their great, glorious victory. And you can learn the tactics that they used, the weapons that they employed, how they fight. And you can use that to craft a tactic to beat them when you go to fight them. And I think that can be very interesting as well.
One thing I definitely really like doing with the Battlegrounds is coloring it through the perspectives of the various totems. This is very, very easily done with the Get a Fenris. In fact, I think most storytellers more or less default to the Get a Fenris when they think of this. But then, when you're thinking about a place where you can learn the ways to battle as your ancestors, doesn't that also sound very much like Younger Brother in a lot of sense? You can also then think of the great women of war in history and bring those into the Battlegrounds and then view it through a Pegasus lens. That's the way I really like to flavor the Battlegrounds. It is this great place, but if you really want to just add a little bit of extra oomph to it, give it that tinge of color through a certain totem's eyes, and suddenly it just becomes so diverse and just capable of so many different things. And then when you couple on top of that just the stuff we've already talked about with using your local region to color the things, where you can talk about Bannockburn, or you can talk about Agincourt with the Battlegrounds, you can take all of these historical things and just view it in, plus all of the totem philosophical angles that you can view everything through. The Battlegrounds is easily probably one of the most diverse ones you can think of if you just take a little bit of time with it.
Yeah, because you can incorporate so much more. If this is a foundational battle of the American Revolution, it's going to be more than just bullets and blood. There's going to be all these very powerful ideas manifesting here as well. And so, yeah, you raise very good points. Next up, we have the CyberRealm, and if you remember our Glasswalker episode talking about how we don't like the idea of cyborg Terminator Glasswalkers, well, here's a place where those can exist, I guess, if you really fancy that idea. The CyberRealm obviously is a place of great Weaver influence, where these ideas of technology and sort of the universality of it have really come to manifest and roost. And these books, written in the late 90s, early aughts, had no idea of just how wide sweeping that stuff would be. When Werewolf first came out, you didn't have a cell phone that could just connect to the internet at whim. And no matter where you are, so long as there's a cell phone tower, you can just talk to people or Google something on Wikipedia and just know something. And so I think even more so nowadays, the idea of the CyberRealm is definitely manifesting because we've just become so inundated with technology. It really has become a foundational part of the 21st century lifestyle.
With a lot of the other realms, per se, when we go back and talk about, like, the Arcadian realm, I mentioned that this is where old ideas go to stay alive, or this is where, with the Atrocity Realm, this is where lost ideas go to stay. The Cyber Realm is that realm that is just constantly ever changing. So I'm kind of meh on playing with the Cyber Realm when it comes to modern settings, because I could do fucking Wreck-It Ralph if I really wanted to. Ralph breaks the internet, and that could be the Cyber Realm if I really wanted it to be. If I wanted a more wholesome one, if I wanted a more dingy, dirty one, let's look at every cyberpunk story ever written. So I feel like the fun parts with the Cyber Realm come when you start using it before it could technically be called the Cyber Realm. I like introducing the Cyber Realm in the Wild West setting, where technology is there and it's burgeoning and it's helping people stay alive and stay more connected, but it's still very much in that whole local sense. I like using the Cyber Realm as a means of kind of umbrally tracking human progress. And when you treat it like that, it again opens up more ideas. You're not just coming in and being like, here's the internet, it's in the Umbra now. But when you look at it as this whole tracking of human progress angle, you still have the internet and you still have the infinity that is that. But the whole tracking of human progress then kind of almost gives it a more noble feeling to it, which then also plays into what Glasswalkers may want to help attribute to, which is that the Weaver isn't all bad. And that's something that you can definitely really play into, because you can very easily come across people who are like, the Weaver is the true enemy, and there's legitimacy to that idea. But if you want to give a little bit of pushback to it, the Cyber Realm's a really good way to do that.
Yeah, and I think showing the diversity, like the book makes it very March of the Machines, we are all cyborgs, It has kind of a cyberpunky feel to it. I agree that there needs to be some aspects of positivity within the Cyber Realm. We need Star Trek levels of optimism and glory in what humanity could invent and how that could improve the human condition. I think those ideas have to have a place in the Cyber Realm, or yeah, the Glasswalkers kind of lose a lot of their punch if you take that away and just make it strictly a Weaver bad kind of thing. It loses its edge there. And so considering all of the ways, good, bad, and neutral, that technology impacts society, I think that's vital for the realm. Following that, we have Erebus, basically Hades or the underworld in the Garu setting. This is, the opposite of the Ethereal realm, where instead of lofty heights of the heavens, you are now in the underworld. And it definitely has a very Hades kind of idea, that Garu are sent here to suffer in a lake of eternal silver, constantly inflicting aggravated wounds which they just barely manage to recover from before doing it again, and having that Sisyphusian torture element to it. I think you can use this realm similarly to how you do the Abyss, or in just, sort of the Grecian model of traveling to the underworld to speak to someone who is no longer around, but has that darker connotation, where you're not just going to find an ancestor, you're going to find an ancestor who did something wrong. And again, I think with our interpretation of the Silent Striders, that's a great opportunity. You're no longer in the cycle, you've gone to this place, like the bad Silent Striders will get sent here, and I think there's a lot that you can work with in that regard.
This is also a fun thing to play with, where I definitely come across plenty of players that like to toy with the notion of Black Spiral Dancer reform. This is definitely something where it's much more contentious with players. I know Ryan hates the idea of Black Spiral reform, but if you want to have a diverse player base, you need to be open to some players liking the idea. And so Erebus is a very good way to play with that notion, and also to kind of solidify to players your views on the BSDs in a lot of sense.
Yeah.
If BSDs can't escape Erebus, that says something about your setting. But those are kind of the big things I like to play with. This is a very much an idea of how legitimate is the notion of forgiveness? How legitimate is the notion of reform within your setting? Are you entirely grim, dark, doom, and gloom? Let your players know by giving them a trip to Erebus. That's a very fun plot to play with.
And showing the shades of gray, if you will, within the Black Spiral Dancer community. That you have your dancers who started off as Gaian, but then deliberately chose to dance the spiral. Like, that says something. Whereas if you're a Black Spiral Dancer who was just born in a breeding pit, you've never known anything but that. Like, where do you fit on that spectrum? And so, you say I don't like Black Spiral Dancer reform. I do like the idea of players advocating for it, of trying to find some way, because it makes a phenomenal story, whichever way it pans out.
So this episode's running a little bit long, so we're going to go ahead and cut it here, and then we will resume next week with the rest of the realms. To see you then.